Joining us now, Corey Lewandowski, former campaign manager, Trump for president, my good friend. Now, I've said this 100 times. Corey Lewandowski turned the lights on in January of 2015. Without him, there's no President Trump. He engineered one of the greatest victories of all time by being outspent 20-1 and did one of the most unbelievable jobs. And now we are actively lobbying to get Corey in the White House to get some stability and sense in there. We're going to get his take on the Comey Kabuki Clown Show. Corey Lewandowski, good to have you with us, man.
Good morning, John. How are you today?
Man, I am fired up about today. They have, let me just start, Corey, my interpretation of this in reading Comey's, I guess, comments or his opening monologue or whatever it is. They got nothing. They have absolutely nothing. Tell me what I've missed here.
Well, John, the bottom line is you haven't missed anything. And if you look at the statement that Jim Comey and his team put out, it's remarkable how in his tenure as the FBI director, he had 2 conversations with then President Barack Obama in his entire tenure. One was to say goodbye. During President-elect's tenure, President-elect Trump's tenure, and up to the time where the president dismissed him for dereliction of duty and not being able to lead the FBI in a capable manner anymore, he spoke to the president on 9 separate occasions. Why is that important? Because that's the type of leader the president is, always talking to the people to make sure they're doing their job, checking in to see if he can do anything to make sure that they are running their departments efficiently. And what's amazing to me is the dichotomy of the way that Jim Comey had a relationship between this president and the previous administration. What I mean by that, John, is there was no note-taking after Loretta Lynch met with Bill Clinton on the tarmac and then had to brief Jim Comey. There was no note-taking anytime Jim Comey had to talk about Hillary Clinton's investigation and the Russian hacking into the DNC. There was none of that. But all of a sudden, Jim Comey, who is now probably the most political person in Washington, sits down, has a conversation on January 6th with then-President-elect Trump, speaks to him about a false dossier, which they know to be factually inaccurate about Russia, and he feels so compelled that he has to start taking notes immediately after he leaves Trump Tower. It's unbelievable the lack of credibility this person has now moving forward.
Boy, you hit the nail on the head, and this dossier has been completely discredited everywhere. It's completely false. The fact that he even brought that up with him is incredible. But then you're right. I mean, he took no notes over Loretta Lynch, no notes over the emails. No, he only met with Obama 2 times. And then he's complaining because he wanted the president, President Trump, to look him in the eye and tell him that he wanted to be the director of the FBI. Well, both of us, Corey, have been leaders in organizations, and you led a big one in 2015 and 16. I mean, don't you look somebody in the eye and say, do you want this job? Do you want to stay in this role? Do you want to get this done? I mean, any leader asks that. This guy, Comey, says that he felt patronized by it. What the hell does that mean?
John, can you imagine somebody comes in to run a giant organization that they had never been part of before? They're now the CEO. And you know what that CEO does? He brings in his leadership team, and he starts asking them questions. Hey, I've inherited a mess, is what Donald Trump inherited when he took over from the Obama administration. And he sits down with his leadership team. And he says, do you want to be here? Do you want to stay? Because maybe people want to leave. Maybe they're loyal to Obama and they're not loyal to the country. And to ask the question, as the President of the United States, to department heads serving in their capacity, how is this any different than the same question he asked David Shulkin, who at the time was the number 2 person at the VA, and said, do you want to stay? And Shulkin said, yes, I do. And then the president has since nominated him, and he is now the secretary of the Department of Veteran Affairs. How is it any different? It's no different. The difference is Jim Comey says, well, I have a 10-year commitment to being the director of the FBI. Yeah, under the condition that you have a competency to keep the FBI running efficiently. And what we have seen time and time again from Jim Comey is his politicizing of the FBI. Whether you agree or disagree, Jim Comey has politicized that organization and has shed a cast of doubt on their ability to be successful under his leadership, and the president made the executive decision that he could no longer lead that department efficiently, and he removed him from his position.
Unbelievable. I mean, what any leader would do when he loses confidence in one of his executives. And the fact that not only did Comey have to take notes, but then the other thing where he said he was uncomfortable when Trump asked him, can I depend on your loyalty? And then they get into this honest loyalty. And then Comey saying that, well, we looked at each other and I was uncomfortable. I mean, this is the director of the FBI of the United States. What do you mean you're uncomfortable? He got asked a legitimate question.
He's a former U.S. attorney. Okay?
Unbelievable.
Or assistant attorney general, so high-ranking position in the Justice Department previous to becoming the FBI director. He worked directly with John Ashcroft, if you remember. Mm-hmm. He worked with President Obama directly. He worked with President Bush directly. And he was uncomfortable having a conversation with the President of the United States. And it's such an absurd statement that he has to detail, my facial expression did not change. Really? Who can actually testify to that fact? Because he doesn't know if his facial expression changed unless he's the one person on the planet who actually has eyes that give him the ability to see his facial expression while he's talking to somebody else.
It is a clown show. I mean, I don't even know how to really classify this. I mean, not only that, you look at the notes he took. I mean, they were sophomoric. I mean, I wouldn't take those notes if I was meeting with anybody. They were completely ridiculous about eye contact. Like I say, facial expressions didn't change. And, the president's asking him legitimate questions. Look, I think the only mistake that the president made in this is he should have fired this guy at 12:03 January 21. Other than that,
John,
right?
There's a real argument there. And, the real argument is, should the president, after having met with Jim Comey, and Jim Comey having a conversation about a false dossier, which has no factual basis. This is the director of the FBI who is now promulgating and perpetuating a false dossier to the president-elect of the United States. Should then candidate Trump and ultimately President Trump have fired Jim Comey on his first day in office? That's really the question here, and he didn't do that. Mm-hmm. But what we now know, regardless of any of those things, is that the president has now nominated a new person to lead the FBI. But what's more incredible to me, John, is the amount of media coverage which is leading up to the hearing. As I watch the morning shows, what you see is the cameras starting to set up in the room and the countdown clocks are running like Jim Comey has some amazing testimony. He doesn't. What we know from the information that he has released was that the president was absolutely accurate, and Jim Comey has now publicly stated this, that the president was not under investigation. He told the president that on January 6th in Trump Tower. Nobody in the mainstream media wants to write that, but what he said specifically was, I should be prepared to assure President-elect Trump that we were not investigating him personally. That was true. Nobody in the mainstream media wants to write that. That is what the president said, and his validation is very clear from this information.
And then, as part of the conversation, the president says to his FBI director, after the FBI director told him 3 times he was not under investigation, the president says, this is really impeding my ability to serve the American people. It would be really helpful if we got this out there that I'm not under investigation. You'll go ahead and investigate whatever facts you want to get out for the other people, but I'm the president. I'm trying to get things ahead. It's stalling. Can you get out the word to the media that I'm not under investigation? Is that not a legitimate question to ask by the leader of the free world or not?
It's a very legitimate question based on Director Comey's own statements on January 6th in Trump Tower when he said the president is not under investigation. He went on to say they did not have an open counterintelligence case on him. Right? That's what he said. That's what his notes say. That's what this, document that he released yesterday to hype up his own ability to generate earned media coverage today says. And what nobody is covering is the fact that there is no investigation into the president. FBI Director Comey has said there was no case open. And what the president said was, whatever you just said to me, can you just relay that to everybody so people know I have nothing to do with this? That is not an unreasonable request. That is not an illegal request. It is a request that would allow the president and his team to report a factual story that there is no investigation of then candidate Trump and now President Trump by the FBI.
Absolutely. We got to get you in the White House, Corey Lewandowski. I know there's an article out last night in the Washington Post basically saying that it's very possible that you could end up there running part of the communications response team. I can't wait for this to happen. Where do we stand? How do we get you in the West Wing?
Look, John, I've got to be honest with you and your listeners. I've got an amazing life. I've got a great life. I've got a great family. I live in New Hampshire. I spent 2 years of my life helping to get then-candidate Trump elected president. I have been a steadfast supporter of this administration, and I will continue to be. But going inside the building, I don't know if that is the best use of my talent. And what I mean by that is I think I have the ability to help the president and help him move his agenda forward from the outside. And the reason being, John, and you know me well, I can say and do things from the outside that I can't do once you become a government employee. Mm-hmm. I can go and have conversations with members of Congress and encourage them and cajole them and recommend that they get on board with the president's agenda, which I can't do if I'm on the inside. I can work, between the hours of 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. doing political work and helping candidates who support the president's agenda get elected. I can't do that from the inside. And the other thing, John, is the outside gives me the opportunity to have a 30,000-foot view of what's going on. And it doesn't, and I don't mean this in a negative sense, but it doesn't saddle you with the day-to-day minutia that the staff inside the building has to deal with. And, whether that means, Billy came late to work today or, Mary's dog, had to go to the vet or whatever those things are that the personnel issues that consume so much time, I'm not saddled with that burden, and I mean that in a positive sense, which gives me the ability, if and when I have conversations with the staff or if I'm privileged enough to speak to the president, to give him my opinion based on no internal factors, just the external factors and what it looks like to try and accomplish his agenda and not necessarily have to worry about the smaller things which are unfortunately part of reality, but also detract from the big picture agenda items like immigration reform and building a wall and getting a tax bill done and repealing and replacing Obamacare, all of those things, infrastructure spending. So there is true value of having the opportunity to stay on the outside and give the president, if he calls me, my best advice and counsel from out there.
Fair enough, but here's the rub. There's nobody that I can find on the inside other than a handful of people, maybe Peter Navarro, Stephen Miller, Steve Bannon, a couple others, that really have the president's back on a lot of things. And how do you get anything done, Corey, when there are numbers of people on your staff, on your team? And let's just be honest here. Honesty is the best policy. It is what it is. You got groups of people in there on the payroll serving the president. They don't believe in him. They don't like him. They don't believe in his agenda. They're paid political operatives. Many of them were for other people. Many of them encouraged him after Access Hollywood to get out of that race. Some are in there now. I know that for a fact. They undermine him at every turn. Stuff is getting leaked at an unprecedented rate. You never saw this under Obama. You never saw this under George W. You never saw it under his father. You didn't see it under Reagan. You didn't see it under Clinton. You didn't see it anywhere but in this White House. The number of things leaked is incredible. The Washington Post had the audacity and the gall to say publicly, we have 30 sources in the West Wing. 30! That's like 3/5 of the entire staff. How do you get anything done in that environment?
John, you've raised a very, very, very good question. And I question that myself because what I have said very publicly, and it is worth repeating, is this. Any person who is serving in the federal government that was brought in to help this president achieve his agenda, the agenda that 63 million American people voted for, that don't support the president, should immediately leave and go do something else, whether they are the chief cook and bottle washer, whether they are the person that holds the door open in some building, or whether they are a senior executive service or cabinet secretary or any position in between. And what we have seen, unfortunately, in this administration is a number of factions who are all pushing their own agenda. And when people ask me, are you on Team A or Team B, I said, boys and girls, listen to me. I'm not on either one of your teams. I'm on the president's team. And if that's not the team that you are on, you shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be in the building. You shouldn't be in the administration. You shouldn't be anywhere. And it's very simple. The American people voted for one person to become the next president of the United States. His name is Donald J. Trump. He outlined his agenda for 2 years in countless rallies and media and told everybody exactly what he wanted to get accomplished, John. That is what he is trying to do. And anybody who is undermining him from inside, whether they are at in a government agency, which most people had never heard of, or they are serving in the most senior capacities inside the White House or the West Wing, if they are not on the president's agenda, then they should remove themselves directly, because they're not only doing themselves a disservice and the president a disservice, but they're doing the country a disservice. And time is so valuable to the president right now. He has a great opportunity to work with the Republican Congress to get his agenda done. And there are so many obstacles, and there's so much infighting in some places within the administration that it is precluding him from being as successful as he could be.
Well, you're right. But the issue remains. They're still there, and we need somebody to get in there and weed that out. And I can just tell my audience, look, from my experience, you turned the lights on in this campaign. You started it from scratch. You hired all the people, and you had your volunteers, and it was a pretty big organization that you built it up to. I was involved in it. For your tenure there, which was 18 months, 19 months, there was never a leak. There was never a backstab. There was never an undermined. There was nothing. I mean, I was there from the beginning,
okay, John, I'm very
Corey.
proud of that.
You should be, because I was a volunteer, but you made me co-chairman and then chairman of the state. Everybody knew you were in charge, but there was never one leak out of that organization, Corey, in 19 months. Not one.
Well, John, the reason is, don't forget, nobody wanted to join our organization at first because no one thought Trump was real except the real believers. And let me tell you, I was one of them, and I was one of the few at the onset. You were there, John, the first one to call Donald Trump as the Republican nominee and the first one to say that he was going to win. But the team that was assembled originally had no ulterior motives. All they wanted to do was help Donald Trump run the best campaign possible. And unfortunately now, we have seen this. There have been public reports. There are multiple people who are serving in the administration, and I mean that in the grand sense, not just the White House and the West Wing and the Executive Office Building, but inside the administration, who did not support the president, did not support his policies, publicly questioned him, and are serving. And John, what's even more disturbing to me, candidly, is not only are those people working in the administration, but there are people who are part of the campaign at an early stage who worked exceptionally hard that are not working for the administration, because some of the people who are now making decisions about personnel don't even know who the people were because they weren't there at the beginning and don't understand what the loyalty factor is. And that's the most troubling part to me, is many, many, many good people who worked very hard to see then candidate Trump win have not been given the opportunity to work inside the government. The president isn't aware of this, but the sum of the staff is, and that should change immediately.
Corey, it's worse than that. I mean, you make the comment that the people making personnel decisions don't know about them. I would say it's worse than that and say they do know about them and they do everything in their power to keep them out. And I know that for a fact. There's people like Sam Clovis trying to get a job in the Department of Agriculture, a nondescript position that they've attempted to railroad him out because of his early support for Trump. There's my friend Curtis Ellis, who was with us from the beginning, who raised $1 million to run radio ads from some of the biggest unions in the nation against TPP before the president even announced his candidacy, right? They're trying to railroad him out of the Department of Labor. I mean, there's names of people that when they come up, they get railroaded out for one reason. They back Trump early. And until we come to grips with this, you're not going to get anything changed in there. That's why I agree with what you're saying, how you can be successful on the outside, but I'm praying every day that you find a way to get in that West Wing and change things.
Look, John, you know me, and I think your listeners know me well enough to know I'm probably more of a hammer than a velvet glove kind of guy, and there are some things I just don't tolerate and wouldn't tolerate, and I think honestly, many people would be afraid if I were to go inside the building because they know that, number one, my loyalty is to the president, and number two, I would hold people accountable for their lack of support or their inability to get things done, because that's the type of person I am. I hold people accountable for their actions. And there's a lot of people who skate by and operate under the radar that have a very good existence right now and don't ever want to see a guy like Corey Lewandowski come in and call them on the carpet.
That's exactly it. That is exactly what we're staring at now. But I think we're going to make it happen. Corey Lewandowski, we're out of time. Thanks for being with us. Corey Lewandowski, former campaign manager, Donald Trump for president. Now we're hoping to find a way to get him inside the West Wing. I'm going to keep working on it. Thanks for being with us, man.
Thanks, John.
Appreciate it.